How do you see the gay-lesbian coalitions moving forward with power? Where do you see them going?
Well, for them, this is a very centrally and closely held issue. It's very much a part of their identity, and they want validation. And that's part of why they're stepping into the public square and seeking it in these ways, I think. So they're not going to go away. They will be very aggressive. Frankly, they're very smart in their use of the media, both news media, but also even more the popular media. That's why I think the issue of tolerance, which became so central to Proposition 8, did not start in this campaign. That had been a multi-year effort to try and define this issue as about acceptance and tolerance, and we can all get along. So I think they will continue with their barrage in the media, and I think I said early on to some friends, if this becomes a vote of the gays versus the Mormons, we're going to lose twice. And it needed to be, and it was, a broader coalition. Because they would love to, and they're choosing to disparage us because in the public eye we're less understood and more negatively viewed than are African Americans or Latinos or the Catholic Church. And so they will do what I think they're doing. They will try and make this a referendum on what they're going to call hate and intolerance. And I don't think they're going to make inroads given the new administration in terms of any national legislation. I mean, part of this is a lot of that Obama vote will be writing him too. One of the things I saw as I visited both McCain and Obama headquarters is an extraordinary connection. This is a level of engagement that I've never seen in politics before. The Obama campaign is more data-driven and committed to engagement. It's not just about a contribution and a vote. It's about talking to a friend. It's about communicating with others. And I think when they reach out, they will, those grassroots people that were in those storefront offices in Watts and other places are going to communicate on their issues. So I think it's going to be waged at the state level and the local level with respect to marriage, but they are going to push on other parts of their agenda. And I certainly don't think it's going to go away.
I agree.
How powerful do you think it will be?
It's less powerful now after what happened on November 4th. The vote is a marker, as I said, and that's why they fought it so aggressively, and why they're so bitterly disappointed that it didn't go their way. I think they read those polling numbers that I showed you and became overconfident and a bit complacent in their margin of support. And I don't think that'll happen again. I do think, in response, President Packard, to your question, that it will come back on the ballot in California. If I've looked at issue agendas over time, and because this is driven by a petition, they just have to meet a fairly low threshold for a well-funded group, and they're going to try and find some other way to do it. But when they're doing that, you're going to be on the no side, which you were on Proposition 22. And when you're in an initiative on the no side, you have important structural advantages with the argument, because you're defending the status quo in that instance. They're trying to change things. And that gives the church an advantaged position. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how the courts deal with this, and the whole topic of unelected judges and so forth and so on. It was ballot initiatives years ago which got Chief Justice Rose Bird of the California Supreme Court in trouble. And the California attorneys in the room would know better than I what the institutional memory is about that. But they vote against a popular vote at their own peril in California, because they must stand for a retention election as a state Supreme Court justice. And an organized group took down 3 sitting state California Supreme Court justices in California. So there's a bit of the accountability mechanism built into California law, which will influence them to see this differently now that the vote's been cast. I don't want to overgeneralize. I don't know enough to be sure. Yes?
Do you detect, or are you aware of any group, formal or informal, behind the gay and lesbian movement?
I know of no group behind it. I mean, the major front group for them is the Human Rights Campaign. And notice how skillful these groups on both sides are in terminology and labeling. It's like choice with abortion. So Human Rights Campaign, doesn't that convey that who could be against human rights? right? And it speaks to the whole issue you confronted in this race.
Well, you'd have to say that the entertainment industry is very strong on
Yes.
the gay side.
Yes.
For example, they had one evening in Barbara Streisand's home and raised $3,900,000 in one 2-hour meeting at her home. Give you an idea of the power of the media. That's also, I think, why the media puts the twist on this they do.
That's right. I think you are taking on a well-funded side, but I don't think there's a group behind that. I mean, in other words, I think things like the Human Rights Campaign and others organize those donors, and then have political consultants and others that are going to target their opportunities.
Alan's question, I think one of the things that was surprising is that the ad against you showing the two missionaries that came on at the end, it was a group, and in that group they identified, one of the identified groups was MoveOn.org, which surprised us a little bit on that. I think that's a really important question that we need to follow up on a little bit, and why MoveOn.org moved into that. Well, not particularly surprising, given.
Yeah. Well, I've interviewed Mr. Boyd actually in his home in the Berkeley Hills. It's so Berkeley. 2 dogs. Find a spot to sit if you can move the dogs. And I'm a little surprised too. I mean, I would think there's a lot of overlap in the constituencies of both groups, and I think there's going to be sympathy there. They will bring a substantial network, and they are innovators in the use of the internet as a tool for politics. Much of what Obama did expanded upon what MoveOn had done. I think it took it to whole new levels. But I think MoveOn is a formidable group, and if they're going to become involved, it suggests a broadening of the coalition, which would have been smart for them from the get-go. So, they may have been finally reaching out to groups as they saw your numbers, the yes numbers rise, and say, we got to build a coalition here. Endorsements and support in initiatives is important. It's not like a vote for a candidate where you have the standing choice. You got the white hats and the black hats, or the red ties and the blue ties, and you know kind of where you stand. In an initiative, you got to make up your mind every time, and you got a whole bunch of them coming at you. So you're looking for cues, and the importance of cues to an initiative voter is very important. Where do those come from? Groups. Editorial endorsements are often very important. Now, advertising is very important. And it's often emotive, and it's often not linked to the issue. I did some consulting on the horse race gambling vote in Utah some years ago, and Wendell Ashton had invited me to help with that, and I remember going to my first meeting, and so labeling and how the issue gets defined is critical. You must be in charge of the definition of the question, not what's on the ballot, what it's in the voters' heads. And we were meeting, and he said, this is a vote about parimutuel wagering. And I raised my hand and I said, this is the last time we'll ever use those 2 words. This is about horse race gambling. It's not parimutuel wagering. If we are defining this as parimutuel wagering, we've lost this election. That cleans it up. Most people have no idea what parimutuel is. Is that an insurance company? And what is wagering? We're all for that, aren't we?
So it's gone wrong.
So, but again, if you went to the technical, no offense intended, lawyer speak of the measure, you'd fallen into a trap. You had to call it what you needed to call it so the voters understood what it was. And there's going to be an intense battle over definition. Issue definition is going to be the most important thing you do in an initiative race.
That's why it states same sex and not same gender.
I think it's wise. And I think you want to do a lot of research on how to frame the question if you're in charge of it. And then you need to do a lot of research on how you can try and interpret the question to persuade voters. And initiative purists get really upset when I'm about this point of the conversation because they say, well, we want it to be vote on what we intended. I say, well, that's not what's going to happen. We're going to fight this out with a public that has a limited attention span and is looking for a cue. And they need to understand what it's about. And the other side is going to take one small part of it and make that what's important.
Thank you.
Great.